So much, Sierra. It is great to see so many of you here today. Before we get started, I'm going to just, we'll do some quick intros with everybody that will be part of the Active Minds presentation, and then we will dive into our presentation. So my name is Lauren. I'm the Director of K-12 Initiatives. I use she, her pronouns, I can't speak. And I am based in Denver, Colorado. And so I really work with all of our programs to ensure that we are scaling our Active Minds programs to the K-12 audience. I'm going to hand it over to Maddie.
Hi, everyone. My name is Maddie Baker. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Program Associate for K-12 Initiatives. And with Lauren, I really work to make sure all of our programming that we're putting out to K-12 is appropriate and educational and very in line with all the values of Active Minds. And I'll pass it to Jaylen.
Hi everybody, I'm Jaylen Waithe. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm also a junior at Battlefield High School in Haymarket, Virginia. And I'll pass it on to Trace.
Hi everyone, my name is Terrell. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm a senior at La Pine High School in La Pine, Oregon. We'll be attending Johns Hopkins University in the fall.
Awesome, thank you. And you'll hear more from Maddie, Trace, and Jaylen in a little bit. So our first part of our presentation, I'm just going to give you some high-level overview about Active Minds, talk a little bit about our Upswing System Enabler Grant, and then you will hear from Jason Traylon about their experience being part of our Your Voices, Your Power program. And then we will have opportunities throughout the presentation to ask questions, but feel free to also utilize the chat as we navigate the presentation. So Active Minds is the leading nonprofit really focused on changing the culture and conversation about mental health, primarily through empowering youth and young adults across the country. We have been around for close to actually nearly 20 years now, when we were started by Allison Mullman when she was an undergrad and lost her brother to suicide, and really realized that there weren't a lot of outlets to talk about mental health. We didn't need to talk about mental health when there was a crisis, that there was an opportunity to talk about mental health throughout a person's experience in school. And so we have grown exponentially over those few years. We started, and we're most well known for our chapter network, really student-led organizations that center the conversation about mental health and really provide leadership opportunities and mental health advocacy opportunities to students to navigate conversations that really matter to them and to help their community really normalize the conversation about mental health. And then we have a variety of different programs that we offer both for schools and the work environment, where we have trainings around supporting everyday conversations through our Validate, Appreciate, Refer program. We have a suicide prevention exhibit called Send Silence Packing, where we currently have 2 tours, one on the East Coast, one on the West Coast, traveling around the country, really highlighting people's stories around mental health and suicide prevention. And then recently, you know, schools have been sort of knocking on our door saying, hey, we need a lot more in the K-12 space. And a year ago, we really formalized the K-12 program. We've been working with Active Minds chapters in the high school space, but with the System Enabler Grant, we're really able to kick off the K-12 initiatives at Active Minds. And so our programs are really centered with a commitment to anti-racism and inclusion. We know that it's really important as an organization to ensure that our work really includes racial and social justice lenses. We can't develop culturally responsive and equitable mental health programming without this. And so, you know, you'll hear a lot, or when you go onto our websites, you'll see, especially for the K-12 programs, that this is really a major tenet in our work. And we really pride ourselves on establishing programs that really provide avenues for learning, healing, and growing together within this anti-racist lens. So when we were received the Upswing System Enabler grant, our focus was really empowering the next generation of Black, Indigenous, and people of color, or commonly known as BIPOC, and lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and questioning, LGBTQ, mental health advocates at a state, school, and federal level. And so we really divided our grant into two programs. We were funded to do Your Voice is Your Power, which was really a school-based advocacy program. And then the Mental Health Advocacy Academy was a youth-led public advocacy academy program where students could do advocacy both in their schools and their community. They got to pick. So I'm going to start with Your Voice is Your Power. And so it was really designed to help high school students build a school community coalition model to really change the conversation and culture about mental health, especially for BIPOC and LGBTQ students. So students who applied to be part of Your Voice is Your Power had to have one of those identities. We kicked off the program in early April 2021, and we went through the spring semester of 2021. So we accepted 85 students into the program, representing 60 schools, and 45 students completed the program. We really found that the last 2 months of the semester was a little nutty in the sense that there was a lot going on, and that was one of the biggest reasons why we had some students drop out of the program, is because it was not ideal to run something close to the end of the semester with finals, AP exams, prom, all the things that happen at the end of the semester. But having said that, we were really happy with the 45 students that completed the program, and I'll share a little bit about what that is in a minute. So just broad strokes, who our ambassadors were. So the 11th graders were the highest grade represented in our ambassador cohort. A good majority of our students were identified as straight, and the second majority was bisexual students. And then a lot of our students were East or Southeastern Asian descent, followed by white, and then 18% Black or African American. So a very, very diverse group of Your Voice is Your Power ambassadors. So the components of the program, we kicked off the program with an orientation. So all of the students that were accepted were invited to this orientation where we kind of, you know, gave them the lay of the land. You know, we really wanted them to start developing a coalition. We kind of unpacked what a coalition is, really talked about why they were there, you know, why were they interested in joining Your Voice is Your Power? What were the topic areas that they were most interested in sort of moving the needle on within the parameters of the program? Each ambassador was assigned an Active Minds coach. So staff members from Active Minds would check in on a regular basis with our ambassadors just to kind of see, hey, what resources do you need? Are you hitting any roadblocks? We provided a workbook, so kind of it was a self-guided program in the sense we gave them the stepping blocks to be successful in developing the coalition, how to run a meeting, the kinds of people or entities that they would need to go and invite to be part of the coalition, how to navigate talking to adult decision makers primarily. And so that workbook really gave them
There's quite a fight.
So Through that, we work with each student to develop SMARTY goals. What was their main area of focus in developing this coalition? And then along the way, we offered 3 different webinars for our ambassadors to participate in. We we presented a webinar called Social Determinants of Health, really like giving students really the foundation of some of the public health things that we are navigating within this work. We focused on our second webinar around the intersection of sexuality and mental health. And then one of our Active Mind speakers shared their story around minority mental health. We also designed a mental health equity one-pager to kind of give our ambassadors the language to advocate for this coalition building. And that was really helpful so that they can could share that to administrators and say, this is what we're doing. And then each ambassador received $250 stipend. So examples of what some of our ambassadors did, a lot of them were able to really plan for the following school year. So they were able to have conversations with their school administrators, other like-minded peers that were really interested in supporting the conversation about mental health. Some schools started chapters. A lot of our ambassadors did not have an Active Minds chapter, and so they built this coalition to actually kickstart their Active Minds chapter. A couple schools hosted presentations about mental health where students were able to share, high level, what is mental health, why is it important, and then also use their own lived experience to highlight BIPOC or LGBT mental health. And you'll see this is an example, the green flyer is an example of one of the presentations, to get folks to the presentation. One of our students, who you will hear from today, launched a mental health survey and then presented the results with their peers, and then really guided a conversation about some goals that they were wanting to kind of move the needle on with regard to what's next for mental health. We know that mental health is a concern. We know what is happening, by surveying our, the peers. So that really kind of springboarded into more of an advocacy campaign, which you'll hear a little bit more about from Trace. And then the biggest success was really being able to work with other affinity groups to really amplify the mental health needs of students. So key learnings was I shared students definitely needed more time. There also was a little bit of disconnect for some of the advisors, the Active Minds chapter advisors. They needed a little bit more buy-in and support. And so that's one thing that lesson learned for us, that we really needed to give the advisors an equal kind of roadmap. It wasn't just for the students. And another key takeaway is that policy changes are now integrated into chapter resources for our youth in schools, especially when they're starting a chapter. So switching gears to the second portion of our grant, which was really the Mental Health Advocacy Academy. We really had no idea what was going to happen when we launched the application, but we were pleasantly surprised. We had 140 students across the country apply. We accepted 36 and 33 completed the program. The program started in the middle of September and went through the middle of December. We met every other week, and the final project was really that each student would develop a mental health campaign that they would facilitate in their community. We incentivized students' participation in the academy by providing a $1,200 stipend, and then also providing funds for their academy campaign as well. So high levels, like key takeaways from our demographics, obviously they were all high school students. 78% of the students identified as students of color. 24% identified as one or more gender minority group, and 46% identified as a member of the LGBTQ community. 46% of our participants had a lived experience with a mental health condition or diagnosis, and 95% of our participants identified that someone close to them had a lived experience of a mental health condition or a diagnosis. So we really valued that a lot of our students had that personal lived experience to bring to the table outside of just their diversity that I just shared. So we designed the academy, like I said, these bi-weekly meetings, and every week that we met with our participants, we sort of focused on different topic areas, and we brought in policy partners to really share their expertise. We didn't want everyone just listening to Maddie and I constantly. So we're very fortunate to partner with all of the organizations here on this slide. So for example, the Center for Law and Social Policy joined us, and they really did like a policy 101 and worked with our students to kind of think about like, how do you build a policy goal? The Trevor Project, Inseparable, the Hopeful Futures Campaign, and Young Invincible, the Wellbeing Trust, excuse me, all came in really talking about what does federal mental health policy look like? And we really focused on the Hopeful Futures Campaign, focusing on a lot of the school mental health legislation that is coming down the pipeline through their initiative. And then Young Invincibles worked with our students to really tell their story. And then the cool thing was that we had state level folks also be part of our expertise, where the Meadows Mental Health Policy Institute shared what they were doing at a local level in the state legislature. And then we partnered with Gen Up, CLOSP, and Young Invincibles, again, to provide feedback to our participants when they were developing their final advocacy campaign. And then Snapchat worked with us as well as our comms team to kind of help them develop and brand their campaigns. So it definitely took a village to navigate the academy, but it was really well worth it in the sense that our academy participants were able to hear a variety of different perspectives around what it meant to be a mental health champion. So as I mentioned, the final project, it was really for each student to create an outline of a mental health campaign that would be facilitated in 2022. And so it was really great because, again, each week we kind of built their plan, from step by step. Some key topic areas that we're focused on, some students were really advocating on excused mental health days, creating peer-powered programs, which you'll hear a little bit from Jaylen about, focusing on generational differences in just mental health in general in communities of color, and then a targeted focus on LGBT mental health. And one student, wanted to bring puppies into a school. So there was a wide variety of really very cool projects that our students developed and are facilitating now. So I'm going to stop sharing, and Sierra is going to share our just a quick takeaway from our showcase, and you can hear some of the presentations.
I was the kid who needed representation in his school curriculum to know that other LGBTQ youth face similar struggles. I won't let that be a reality for anyone else.
I plan to talk to newly elected government officials. I hope to show them that with a rise in suicide rates as well as an increase in depression and anxiety in teens, it's more important than ever to have support for students available in school.
While advocating for other Black teens and young adults, I hope to make the conversation of mental health in our community something more comfortable, and I hope to influence others to get help and be advocates themselves.
High schoolers are becoming ever more active in the social justice, activism, and mental health conversations.
This is important to me because I saw an extreme need for it in my school, especially with COVID, and students were just going through all kinds of things, and they didn't have anyone to go to.
So as you can see, that was just a very small smidge of really a 2.5 hour program that all of our students got to present their campaigns. Just wrapping up, some key learnings from our Academy students was that a lot of them felt like they were far more equipped to really spread the word within their social circles about mental health, and are really advocating for change in their schools through meeting with school leadership and organizing events and starting mental health clubs. So all in all, really positive feedback from our participants, and a lot of action oriented feedback from our participants as well. So I'm gonna pause there, and I'm gonna hand it over. I'm gonna check the chat if there are any questions that have been in the chat while I've been presenting. There may not have been, but I'm gonna hand it over to Maddie, Trace, and Jaylen for the next portion, and then we'll get to some questions a little bit later.
Great, thank you so much, Lauren. Okay, so Lauren and I are super grateful to have Jaylen and Trace with us here this afternoon, evening. I'm going to let Jaylen and Trace reintroduce themselves very quickly, and then we're just going to jump right into questions. So go ahead, Jaylen.
Good evening, everybody. Just to introduce myself, my name is Jalen Waithe. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm a junior at Battlefield High School in Haymarket, Virginia. It was an amazing experience to participate in both Your Voice is Your Power program and the Mental Health Advocacy Academies.
Yeah, thanks, Jaylen. My name is Trace Terrell. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm a senior at La Pine High School in La Pine, Oregon. We will be attending Johns Hopkins in the fall. Like Jaylen, I was involved with the Your Voice is Your Power program and the Mental Health Advocacy Academy because I really felt inspired to act on mental health from my lived experience.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, so first question, why do you both think it's important for youth to lead the conversation around mental health in schools?
So this is a crazy important question because it's important for us to communicate to our peers is that we are our own future. So if we don't lead this conversation, who's going to? And I think it's beautiful that there are so many youth like myself, Trace, and all of you in the audience as well, getting involved in this conversation. And, you know, I'm honored to represent Active Minds today, which is an organization that's given me so much. But before we hear from Trace, I actually really like to spin this around to our peers in the chat to see kind of what's your why, what's the reason why, you know, you've gotten involved in this conversation.
I'll break the ice a bit. Thanks so much, Jaylen, for that great question. My why is just knowing that younger generations deserve better. They deserve better support, better conversations, better informed mental health care in and out of schools and in and out of professional settings. So that's why. I see we have a hand raised. Go ahead.
Yeah, I appreciate the question. And thank you for the presentation and all the work that especially the young folks have done. It's really amazing, really impressive. Yeah, I mean, to answer your question about the why, definitely that lived experience connection, not just as someone who got into youth suicide prevention work initially because of, you know, my own lived experience, but also, you know, seeing what my peers were going through at the time and just the lack of understanding of how an intersectional lens can help us understand just the different ways that we are all impacted by, the things that impact our mental health. And I do have a question kind of related to that for the young folks, if it's okay to ask that, or I can ask it later. Okay, great. I'm really curious about, you know, especially for those who do have that lived experience connection or, you know, are connected to someone who has been struggling with their mental health. What kind of supports did you need, you know, while going through this process? Because, you know, it's kind of a sticky situation when you are also impacted at the same time you're doing the very work that, you know, someone like you needs in your life. So what does healing for a healer, someone who does healing work, look like?
That is a great question. Thank you so much for bringing it up. You know, I think Active Minds does a really great job at emphasizing the importance of self-care especially in the field and space of mental health advocacy. I think, at least in both of the programs I was involved in, right, we talked about what it means to be a leader, what it looks like to support yourself when you're doing that leading, when you're getting involved with the community. I like to think of kind of acting as a leader with lived experience in mental health as kind of the airplane metaphor, where it's like you have to put your mask on first before you can put masks on others. And I think that's so relevant to the work that Active Minds does. And, you know, Maddie and Lauren are just such great supports. They were always there for us. And, you know, I feel like I can always reach out to them whenever, if I have a question or anything like that. So I definitely felt really supported in both of the programs.
Definitely. And I'll just add on to that in that I got into this, you know, this game relatively recently. But honestly, again, Active Minds has just been so helpful in that. And I also have that lived experience. The pandemic was really hard for me. I've moved several times over the past several years. Your Voice is Your Power started the same month that my grandmother had passed, and I was having a really, really rough time. We've been always so close. So that lived experience is I think a vital piece to a lot of us. Is that something that's also transferable to a lot of my peers as well? And so I think it's great that there are organizations like those, you know, in the audience today, as well as Active Minds, that give those supports, and that, you know, just knowing that there's somebody that you can talk to, and that there's somebody that's always, you know, that has your back at all times, is great to have during those times.
Awesome. Thank you so much for those. We're going to move on to the next question here. If you could give advice to encourage another student who is just starting in their advocacy journey, what would it be?
This is another great question. What I think my biggest piece of advice would be is to create a coalition of stakeholders who can really support and promote your work. For me, in both of my campaigns and both of my projects, it was really important to invite, right, school staff, students, community leaders, government officials, right, creating that diverse coalition to really make sure that this project is measurable, that it's really achievable. Yeah, I just think that's so important. And I know that a lot of people in this space are often working towards the same goals. So the more that you can really bridge those interests, the better. And I also just want to touch on the idea, right, that there's often this conception that adults aren't willing to listen to teens. While there's definitely some truth to that, right, I think there are adults who want to listen to teens, right, who want to make sure that young adult voices are heard and captured and really leveraged in the space, in the youth mental health conversation. So I want that to also be kind of a beacon of hope in this work.
Absolutely, I agree in that. Just to touch on that adult space, I think it's incredibly necessary to gain that support in the adult space, because gaining that coalition with your friends, your peers, in my experience, has been quite a lot easier than getting that support in the adult space, especially depending on where you live in the composition of your community. And so having those adults to vouch for your advocacy, and to other important stakeholders in the community, will help you get your message out to those who really ultimately bolster your voice and create change. And also, just another point is that keep that ambition is something that I see. It's very easy to get discouraged when you're involved in a industry, maybe not the right word is industry, but when you're involved in a subject on a day-to-day basis that can get kind of heavy, and is involved in social justice and mental health advocacy, it can become difficult to persevere through any pushback that you get. But just keeping that ambition and understanding what your goals are and the way that you can achieve your goals is infinitely necessary for those that are getting inside mental health advocacy.
Awesome. Thank you. How has Active Minds prepared you to be leaders in conversations about youth mental health advocacy?
Definitely. Well, Active Minds wasn't technically my first mental health advocacy experience. This organization truly opened my eyes to this realm and all that it could offer myself and my peers. And Active Minds has a wealth of resources, support, knowledge that is always readily available to help me develop projects, engage my peers, and share my knowledge. People will even stop me in the halls and say, "Hey, you work with Active Minds, right?" And so I think that for myself and for my peers, we almost become kind of beacons of knowledge in this realm, and we become people that our peers will come to and ask questions, to get involved in mental health advocacy themselves, as well as just to reach out to if they're going through a hard time. So we come to take on a lot of roles in this field, through kind of becoming peer counselors, becoming people that share that knowledge towards our own communities, whether that be school or outside. So definitely Active Minds has prepared us in way too many ways, honestly.
Yeah, Jaylen is absolutely right about kind of the idea of behind Active Minds, which is like we instead of me. Active Minds is so good at creating that national coalition, that national community that I think is so helpful when doing all of this work and kind of inspiring that next generation of mental health leaders. I would say my experience is a lot the same to Jaylen's. While I did have some prior experience, it was limited in the sense that it was kind of orchestrated by the adults in the space. Through Active Minds, however, right, I was really able to initiate, organize, and develop my own projects. And I think that was just so powerful and empowering, I guess. I think Active Minds did a really good job at helping me do this, kind of through their strategic planning with SMART goals, those presentations from field experts and just mental health professionals, and also just that continual support that we brought up before. It honestly just feels like a community, and I think that's what's so helpful to these next generation leaders.
Absolutely. And to touch on that community part, because I just think that's so important to touch on, in that Active Minds is like a family. Like, the Mental Health Advocacy Academy, I made friends in there who I still communicate to, with to this day. And so those friends, that community, just knowing that you have people that have your back, that have similar experiences to you, or even have completely different experiences to you. We have a Slack network where you can always go on and see what other chapters are doing across the nation. That's incredibly useful. Ask a question, see what other chapters have gone, what their successes, what their failures have been, and what they've learned from those. It's incredibly important. And I think that Active Minds has done a great job at fostering that community and almost creating that really tight bond between everybody that's a stakeholder.
Great. Thank you, guys. So Trace, you actually touched on this a little bit, but how do you engage adults in this conversation, even if there is pushback?
Another great question. I have experienced some pushback, but it was mainly in the sense that there's this stigma that young adults and teens aren't equipped or aren't able to really lead conversations about youth mental health. My peers and I have been continually underestimated in our ability to really carry out comprehensive mental health projects that make meaningful change in our communities. That's been a really big barrier for me. And I think what I learned from it and what I would advise other teens is to really fight for your seat at the table. Your voice is so important and it deserves to be heard, right? I like to use the analogy of we wouldn't create fiscal policy without, first consulting the input and advice of economists and financial experts. So why should it be any different for youth mental health, right? And I think you can do that through all sorts of ways, but I think persistent emails and meetings, showcasing project plans like the ones that we developed in both Your Voice is Your Power and the Mental Health Advocacy Academy, and also just sharing your lived experience, right? I think personal storytelling is such a powerful way to really advocate for mental health. And so I definitely would suggest other people do that in the face of adult pushback.
Yeah, you hit it, you hit the nail right on the head in that I've also had my fair share of pushback, in my own community. A lot of times it's not necessarily that immediate no or that immediate underestimation, but in my experience, sometimes it's been people who seem to be supportive. And, when it comes to actually making change, they just don't, perhaps put in the work on that front. But regardless, that perseverance is incredibly necessary. And it's unfortunate, but you do have to prove your worth sometimes. Like Trey said, you have to fight for your seat at the table. You have to show that you're prepared, that you're willing to fight this fight, and that you're there for your peers and yourself. But also, the worst that can happen in most situations is you don't receive a response. Just reach out to somebody, ask around, send some emails, call some offices. There are adults that are willing to help, but that misconception that there's nobody that wants to help in that adult space is just not true. In some communities, it may be harder to find those supports in that adult space, but it's so necessary. Just reach out. The worst that can happen is that, you don't receive a response.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you guys for being so honest there. So what do parents, caregivers, and educators want to know about becoming an ally to students in the mental health advocacy space?
Another
Again,
great question. Go ahead, Jaylen.
Trace.
Okay, yeah. I think, right, if there's anything I want to leave the adults in this space here today with, it's the idea that teens aren't the ones afraid to have conversations about mental health. Adults are. And I think that is such a big component to this whole conversation about youth mental health. There's this idea that conversations about mental health just aren't happening. And that's just not a reality because my peers and I encounter it every single day. And those conversations don't just stop at school, right? They happen at home, they happen in the community, they happen everywhere. And so the more that we can really support those conversations, the better. For adults, right, I think learning how to be an ally in the youth mental health advocacy space, I think it first involves asking your young person, right, how can I support you and your friends in this work? And I also want to touch on this idea of like, if you're not comfortable asking your young person or being an ally in that space, find another adult or support system who can really aid that young person in that effort.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I mean, again, this is a difficult field to be involved in, but it's difficult sometimes to engage parents or caregivers or other adults, but it's important to tailor your engagement, tailor the way that you present your facts, the way that you go about presentations to your community and the people that you're talking to. And the biggest thing that I just want to leave here is that the conversation is going to happen whether you like it or not. But you, as the adult, have the power to determine the circumstances surrounding that conversation. You know, if when adults close the door, it makes teens think that, they're alone in their journey or they don't have that support system. But when adults leave that door open or they even show interest, they can also get involved in that work and they can actually truly become not only an ally, but somebody that actively is involved in their teens' lives and their mental health journeys, as well as getting involved in their peers and seeing what they can do in order to not only support that with their teen, but also in their own personal lives. Because at the end of the day, everybody has mental health and it's important for everybody. So it's just incredibly important that you leave those doors open and you have those pathways for young people to come to you and that they feel comfortable doing so.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. So, how can community-based organizations support youth in becoming mental health advocates, and what can they learn from Active Minds?
Yeah, I can kind of start this one off. I would say that community-based organizations can play a really large role in this effort. Something that Active Minds does really well is meeting the needs of students and meeting the needs of young people. So Active Minds was super flexible in terms of meeting times, right? Because I'm on the West Coast, there's some on the East Coast, there's some, spread all out through the middle. So they were definitely really good about coming up with a time that works for everyone. Workload wasn't too bad, like it felt always manageable. They also do a really great job at making sure that their programming is really led by teens. And it really focuses on that teen aspect, which I think is so necessary. Another key component that was kind of throughout both of the Your Voices, Your Power program and the Advocacy Academy was that idea of like financial support. I think that's huge for a lot of students, especially right dealing with part-time jobs, other familial duties. Right, having that financial support is so huge, and I think it helps a lot of people. And there are grants and scholarships and all these different funds out there, like the Upswing Fund, that are really there to promote students in this work.
Absolutely. And having to touch on, what Trace is saying, and that financial support not only is an incentive for you to do your work, or to participate in this conversation, but it also enables you to do it in a lot of ways, because some people have, restrictions on what they can do based off of their own personal situation. So that's incredibly important. But to kind of lean in into kind of my own question here, I kind of have three prongs in my opinion, in that one is definitely the accessibility that the Active Minds provided us, especially in the Mental Health Advocacy Academy, but also in Your Voices, Your Power as well. And there were those virtual options, and we met often enough that we were able to continue to be productive over the course of meetings. But, it also wasn't every day that we were meeting for 5 hours, and that, Active Minds made it a point to understand that there are lots of other things that go on in teens' lives, and that we were able to prioritize in a lot of ways our mental health advocacy work, just because of how convenient it was, which Active Minds did a great job at making it. Also, those forums for collaboration, and that we've seen over the course of kind of this presentation, and me and Trace, and that those forums for collaboration are so necessary. It was great to be inside of, a large mental health advocacy academy meeting with, 30 plus kids all in the chat, talking to each other, bouncing ideas off of each other, learning together, with places like class presenting or Inseparable presenting. So it was incredibly nice to have that. And it was just a constant aura of support and love, all in the chat, all joking around with each other while all learning together, which was amazing. And another thing, and this is incredibly important, is that Active Minds treated us like we were professionals and didn't talk down to us. And a lot of community-based organizations can have that, in which there is teen programming, but it's almost infantile and makes us seem as though we're not necessarily equipped to have these heavy conversations or truly take on this work in a way that we are getting ready to go into the world as young adults. In the Mental Health Advocacy Academy, we range. Some people were just kind of starting out in high school. Some people are getting ready to go to college, like Trace. And so it was amazing not only to have that, big sibling, little sibling relationship within the Mental Health Advocacy Academy, but also in that Active Minds treated us as if we were equals, and didn't necessarily, talk down to us and make us seem like, we were less than, which was amazing.
Great. Thank you so much. And I think we're going to end with this last question here. What does your future in mental health advocacy look like?
Yeah, so I can talk a little bit about that. I will be attending college in the fall, and I really hope to major in public health and computer science. I'm kind of a data geek. I love spreadsheets. I love everything to do about data. So I really hope to do mental health research. But I also think that policy side of things is so important. So I really hope to work kind of in tandem with policy experts in developing legislation that really reflects the needs of people, and that really moves this conversation about mental health forward.
Definitely. And I have a lot of plans, so I'll kind of go from now to further in the future. Right now, I'm working on a project that I developed in the Mental Health Advocacy Academy. I named it WEMBL, the Workshop for Elementary Mental Health, BIPOC, and LGBTQ plus education. So this is a large project that encompasses elementary schools within my community, that I've kind of been trying to gauge the response from the county to try to see if, you know, we can get some curricula in place for elementary school students, because mental health is something that we always have. We have it ever since, you know, we're born, and so it's necessary for us to kind of begin educating the younger kids and kind of create these conversations and get them thinking about it while also making it in a digestible format, because, you know, you don't want to be talking about suicide prevention for fourth graders, but at the same time, we also want to understand that these are things that begin younger and younger. Statistics are showing that, you know, the trend towards mental illness is going younger and younger, you know, and so it's not a thing that is affecting adults. It's not a thing that's only affecting high schoolers, affecting middle schoolers, etc. So kind of starting those conversations young, I think, is incredibly important. So that's something that I've been working on. And, you know, when I begin to, you know, do college applications this summer, I definitely hope to continue working with Active Minds in that capacity. I will absolutely, if it's not reinstated this year, be reinstating the the University of Texas Active Minds chapter once I get there. Of course, absolutely, they're obsessed with me. I'm just gonna put that into the atmosphere here. And so you know, I kind of hope to work on that front, and afterwards, I'm really hoping to go into creative advertising, which, you know, most people wouldn't see as a mental health adjacent topic, but I definitely hope that I can kind of broadcast a lot of what I've learned in my adolescence on that national space. You know, who knows, you might see a Coca-Cola commercial that's talking about mental health in the next 7 years here. So definitely my work is not over, and I definitely will always continue to engage my peers in this conversation, so that, you know, I have brothers that just turned one, twin brothers that just turned one. They will be hearing about mental health their entire lives. They'll never get away from it. And so just kind of continuing to engage my peers and those who are coming up after me in kind of this school system is absolutely necessary. And so I'm excited.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Jaylen and Trace. I really think I speak for all of us when I say I'm so excited to see what the future has in store for both of you in terms of all your success, especially in mental health advocacy as well. So I'm going to turn it back over to Lauren.
Yeah, so thank you again, Maddie, Trace, and Jaylen. So the floor is open. What wonderings do you have, or follow-up questions to any of the wonderful things that both Trace and Jaylen have shared? Feel free to unmute or add questions in the chat.
I know there's no way nobody has questions. Come on, lay it on us. All right, we're here.
Yeah, so we have a question around are y'all youth leaders available for consultation? So that's a great question. We just launched something called the Active Minds Trailblazers, where we invited our Active Minds Academy students, as well as students, youth and young adults that were part of our National Advisory Board, where we worked with Young Invincibles and the Wellbeing Trust, and we developed an online advocacy tool that we will be launching this May. So be sure to follow Active Minds during Mental Health Awareness Month, because we'll be launching it. All that to say is, yes, you know, there is a system in place for us to connect with our youth and young adults in a way that ensures that the organization that we're partnering with is including youth voices in an intentional way, not a performative way. And so we will definitely work to create some sort of partnership with an organization to get some feedback or to partner on certain things. So I will definitely put our contact information in the chat, and so we can certainly connect for information. Yeah, so to consult with youth serving organizations, so I just noticed that. So stay tuned. We are working on this. We would like to actually build a youth serving consortium that's really interested in mental health. And so we are navigating sort of next steps of around what that looks like, and how youth serving organizations that aren't mental health experts, we will be the mental health experts essentially, but thinking about how we can leverage the power of youth serving entities and youth voices in this work. So yes, feel free, like I said, I'll put my email in the chat, and then we can definitely connect, and I can pass that information on once we get started.
No one else is coming off mute. I selfishly have a question for you, Jaylen. I think Lauren in her intro talked about your work on peer support, or your focus on peer support. And I just would love if you could share a little bit more about your campaign, or some kind of high level takeaways on what a peer support advocacy campaign looked like.
No, absolutely. So Wemble has been a very complex project to a very complex endeavor. But there's definitely that really large definitely large necessity on engaging my peers in that conversation, because absolutely we cannot do this alone. So I've absolutely been networking with some of my other fellow leaders from my social justice work as well in my county, to kind of gauge those responses, not only from a county level, but also for my peers, to see, how exactly we can go about this in the best way possible. Definitely, especially when you're doing something that treads the line between, I actually had to rebrand it to a workshop, but it definitely treads the line when you're teaching things to elementary school students. Not only is there a level of approval that has to go through on a curricular level, but also the fact that they're elementary school students, but having that backing behind you that also comes from diverse backgrounds. I've pulled people from my Black Student Union Coalition, which I've been leading in my county, kind of in order to bring those diverse voices into the light in pertaining to this. So absolutely, these peer programs that are kind of centered around allowing teens to get in and not only create change for ourselves, but create change for our little sisters, our little brothers, our little siblings in general, is incredibly necessary. And I'm happy to, have the opportunity to do it.
That's amazing. I love that so much. Thanks, Jaylen.
Awesome. Well, if no one has any further questions, I put my email in the chat. You are welcome to email questions to both Maddie and I via this, or for Trace and Jaylen, and we can certainly pass the questions on to them. But thank you very much for being here. We really encourage you to follow Active Minds, especially during this Mental Health Awareness Month, because we are launching a very, very cool campaign that will be really easy for folks to share, and it's very digestible for any audience, really. So let's keep in contact, and thank you for your time. Sierra, I'll hand it back to you.
Thanks so much, Lauren. Thanks, Maddie, Trace, Jaylen, for your time and expertise. It was so great to learn more about your experiences and your work. Like Maddie said, wishing you all the best. I also want to put a quick plug in for Active Minds and their website. It is a wealth of resources for community-based organizations who are looking to start something like this, starting work with youth, or just there's a program called Active Minds at Work, which is something that we've looked into just at Panorama around how can we support employees at work in their mental health. So I would just encourage you to check out the Active Minds website. They do a really great job at keeping content really up to date, and again, just a wealth of resources there. And with that, thank you all for joining. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to shoot them over to Lauren or me. And have a great rest of your week.